Hello and welcome to the FATBOSS guide to Lady Darkvein in Castle Nathria.
This encounter is probably one, if not the hardest, out of the first 7. It's full of tons of different abilities and mechanics that you need to get used to, and can go wrong fast if you fail on some of the more important ones. To start off, we'll explain the prime mechanic in the fight.
So the boss has 4 main abilities that she'll use from the start until the end of the fight. Each of them is linked to one of the 4 Anima Containers throughout the room. These containers will slowly gain energy over time, and at 33 and 66% thresholds, the abilities linked to them become empowered, making them all harder to deal with. You can see the energy of each container as a new UI element. On the default UI, it appears just under your minimap. You'll likely see all empowerments on a first kill, so it's fundamental you understand how not only all 4 baseline abilities work, but how they are changed when they're buffed by the containers. Fortunately, however, you can click on the containers to release their energy, so you won't be seeing the empowerments from each throughout the entire fight. When clicked on, they do take a little while to empty whilst dealing raid-wide ticking damage in the process. This raid damage does stack, which can be problematic, so ideally you never want more than 2 emptying at the same time. We assign 2 different players to click on them, one on the 2 on the left and another player for the 2 on the right. You want to click them frequently throughout the fight to keep their energy below 33% at all times. There is, however, one other mechanic in play for these containers. On the pool and around every 25% of the boss's health removed from this point, the boss will focus on a new container. She will start on the far left hand side, working her way right. Whilst they're focused, the container cannot be emptied and it gains energy at a much faster rate. This acts as a DPS check, because if a container reaches 100% energy, it'll explode and wipe the raid shortly afterwards. So you need enough DPS to force the boss to refocus a new container before the current focus container reaches 100% energy. To give you a little bit more time on each container, you want to empty the next container to be focused before the boss reaches that next 25% health milestone. And immediately once she has swapped her focus to a new container, you want to begin emptying the previous one to slowly remove any of the empowerments gained. So with that, let's look at the 4 abilities and which containers they're linked to.
So the first container is linked to the tank kit. Each time the boss reaches max energy, she'll hit the tank, dealing a burst of physical damage and applying a nasty dot. You'll want to taunt on 2. At 33% in the first container, random raid members will be debuffed with shared cognition. This makes the initial physical damage hit on the tank also be copied onto these players, so healers need to keep a close eye on these debuff players and make sure that they're topped. At 66%, this makes the tank debuff explode, dealing damage to nearby players when it expires. Just make sure your targeting circle doesn't hit any other players and you'll be absolutely fine. The next container is linked to the bottled Anima spell. The boss frequently uses this ability, spawning multiple zones throughout the room that will explode, dealing massive raid-wide damage unless they're soaked by a single player. You'll want to tank the boss towards the middle of the room, as this will make soaking these circles a little bit easier to achieve. At 33% in the second container, when you soak one of these zones, it will leave behind a patch on the ground that deals ticking damage, and these last forever. There isn't much you can do about them, just do your best to avoid them throughout the fight. At 66%, each zone will need to be soaked twice, as the bottles will bounce after being soaked the first time. The next container is linked to the shared suffering orbs. These 3 orbs will do small bursts of damage to the nearest player until they explode around a minute later, which will definitely wipe you. 3 players will be debuffed shortly after the orbs spawn, with each player being linked to another by a beam. You can use this beam to destroy the orbs by simultaneously hitting all 3. At 33%, the orbs will be linked together by their own beam. This deals massive damage to anyone who comes into contact with it. This makes destroying the orbs take that little bit longer, as players with the beams might have to take the long way round to go and destroy them. And at 66%, the beams on the orbs will begin to rotate. This can be really slow to deal with, as it becomes quite difficult to position all 3 players at the same time without getting hit. It's vital that you do this carefully, because if you rush it and one of the debuff players with the beams dies, then you're not going to be able to destroy the orbs and you're just going to wipe. We recommend that you bloodlust this particular container focus, as this should allow you to only have to deal with these rotating beams a single time. And for the final container, this is linked to the ads. Throughout the fight, 2 players will be debuffed and will have a targeting zone around them. When this expires, you'll deal a massive burst of damage to anyone within this circle and spawn an ad. These ads do not move, so you'll want to spawn them both in melee so they can be cleaved down. One of them will be a conjured manifestation, and all these guys do is just spam cast condemn, dealing massive raid-wide damage if they're not interrupted. So you'll want to set up a rotation beforehand to make sure this is covered every single time. The other ad is the Harness Spectre. This guy must have a tank next to him at all times, because he'll also cast Condemn if no one is within melee range. This version, however, cannot be interrupted. Aside from that, he'll just hit the tanks with his Guilt Slam. This deals a burst of shadow damage and debuffs you, increasing the damage you take from the boss hit and the Guilt cast by 10% for 15 seconds, and this stacks. Instead of taunting on this debuff, you'll just want your DPS to focus this guy down first, and the idea is that you kill it so fast that stacks don't become high enough to become an issue. Meanwhile, you just want to cleave any additional damage onto the manifestation while keeping it interrupted. At 33% in the container, the initial debuff that spawns the ad also causes the targeted players to become rooted. Ideally, you'll want players to already be near melee to bait the spawn, but ultimately, as long as you keep to the same rule of nuking the tank ad first whilst keeping the other interrupted, it doesn't really matter too much if they do spawn spread out. At 66% in the container, the ads will send out fragments in all directions when they spawn. We didn't see this on our first kill as we killed the boss before this happened, but here's some beta footage for you. You've just got to make sure that you keep a really close eye on their spawn location and watch out for all the fragments as they fire across the room. But that's all the abilities and mechanics in the encounter. The most important thing is just that you limit the amount of empowerments that are active at the same time by keeping on top of clicking the containers, making sure you click them just before they're focused and then clicking them again immediately after the focus has ended on them. Do that whilst maintaining really high damage on the boss and you should be good.
Thanks for watching, guys. If you'd like to know more about this encounter or any other fight in Castle Nathria, then do go check out our guides over on Wowhead. A link for that can be found in the description below. Take it easy, and we will see you in the next one.
Thanks for watching.